Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to day one of our acrylic pouring extravaganza. I am really excited to be here. I am hope you're excited. Thanks so much for joining me. It's going to be a fun week. I'm going to do some different tips and tricks and demos every day, all week long, all weekend long. And I'll have something incredibly important and exciting to talk about near the end of the week that's going to be happening next week. So welcome, everybody. Novala is here. Hey, Novala, my friend, I'm glad to see you again. Pat is here. Susan is here. Hey, Lily. Hey, Linda. And let's see here. Who else is here? So I'm sure more people will be joining us as we progress. So, but welcome. How is everyone doing today? Hey, Donna. So we've got a whole bunch of people already here, which is great. So let's see, Donna is here again. We got double Donnas. Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about kind of going back to the basics a little bit. I wanted to make this week kind of inclusive for all different levels of acrylic pouring, from the very beginning, people that have just started or haven't even started yet, but are excited about acrylic pouring, all the way through more intermediate and advanced people. So we're going to be starting kind of at the beginnings, and I'm going to talk about some supplies, some paints, different pouring mediums that I recommend for kind of the different levels of skill. And so hopefully this will kind of give you a little courage if you haven't started and you're really confused and you don't know where to start or what to get. Hopefully I can clear up a lot of confusion or maybe even misinformation. I've got two handouts for you, or downloads. They're already in the membership where you got your Canvas Coverage Cheat Sheet 2.0 when you signed up for the Acrylic Pouring Extravaganza. And I'll put that link in the chat as well. And if you haven't signed up for that, so you can get all of the resources. So I have two of them for you, and we'll go over each of them. So, all right, I'm just checking. And uh-oh, my friend Donna's got a migraine. That's terrible. I have those too, and they are awful. So hope you're feeling better, Donna. So let's see here. So if you have any questions throughout our live, we're going to go about maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour. We'll see. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be checking the chat and answering your questions as we go. So let's start with looking at some paints. And this is kind of the most important part of acrylic pouring, is the acrylic paint. So I want to start with the very basics. If you have just started or haven't even started acrylic pouring yet, I recommend one type of paint above all else, and I'll walk through that type of paint and then also some more intermediate types and some specialty types of paint. So I'm going to switch the camera here, and we'll take a look at some paint. So let me flip it over here. So here we go. I have got two little containers of apple barrel craft paint. This is the cheapest craft paint I can find. You can find this at Walmart. It works great. I have used it for many, many paintings. It's about it's maybe 60 cents now, inflation, you know, but it's still pretty much the cheapest paint you can get. It works really well. And you don't have to get any more complex at this at the beginning stages. So if you are just starting your acrylic pouring journey or want to start, this is where I would recommend starting. The Apple Barrel brand, get the matte acrylics. It comes in different sheens. This is a matte. It also comes in a satin that's a little bit more expensive, and a gloss, which is also a little bit more expensive. But these work just great, and I've used them many, many times for many paintings. And we'll talk about what I would mix these with in a minute. But that is the beginner step right there, step number one. So I would call that just starting out in acrylic pouring. Apple Barrel is just fine to use. The next step up, you can kick it up a notch and go over to the DecoArt Americana craft paints. You can find these at Michael's. You could find them at Hobby Lobby. I think Joann's Fabrics has paints like this, the Deco Art Americana. These are wonderful paints to use. One thing I like about them the best is they have a huge range of colors. So you can find all of these different unusual, interesting colors. I love these two. Morning Mist is kind of a very warm gray color. Thicket is a beautiful green, like a deep kind of a blue-green color. These are much higher quality paints than our Apple Barrel brand right here. These are about $1 something a bottle, but still very affordable for getting started. So you could start with the Apple Barrel. You could expand into maybe the Deco Art to get a little more range of colors. And these work really well. Next up, I would also incorporate with both of these types of colors some metallics. And I'll share two of them right here that I use all the time. And let me kind of scooch these over. So Deco Art Dazzling Metallics. And this is the Folk Art Metallics. The Folk Art ones you can find at Walmart, along with our Apple Barrel paints. The Deco Art you can find at Michael's, Hobby Lobby, Joann Fabrics, and of course online too, if you wanted to check out like Amazon and things like that. I would kind of steer clear of Amazon for a lot of paints because they are most often overpriced, I find. So it's better if you can go buy them in person. But these are great. And metallics in particular really help with developing cells and creating cells in your paintings. I love metallics. I always use them in my paintings, specifically for that reason. I mean, I love the metallic colors, but they really help generate cells. So if you're having trouble generating cells, metallics are a great place to start. And I'll talk about cells a little bit more in a second. So we've got 3 different types of paints so far. These are all relatively inexpensive. The metallics are a little bit more expensive than our Deco Art Americana, but that's because they're a little more specialized with the metallics in them. If you want to kick up the metallics another notch, you can go up to the Deco Art Extreme Sheen metallics, and these really help cell development a whole lot. This is aquamarine, but they also make a gold called 24 karat gold. I'll show you another version of that, but that really can help create very big, great looking cells. So Deco Art Extreme Sheen is kind of a more premier craft paint, but it helps with cells a whole lot. So then, of course, this is a little more expensive than these metallics, and of course, than the rest of these paints. But these are a great place to start if you just want to try out acrylic pouring and see if it's for you, see if you would like to do it. This is as sophisticated as you really need to go. And I'll talk about how to mix these paints up in a second. And tomorrow, I'm going to share with you a foolproof paint mixing recipe using these types of paints. So that is the basic beginner series of paints. I still use these quite often, and these also sometimes. I usually mix my own colors now instead of using the craft paints, but I do like to use the metallics. So that is our kind of beginner series of paints. Now let's take a quick look at a little more advanced type of paint, and this is what I use a lot more often than our craft paints now, but don't feel you have to use these right off the bat. You can kind of grow into these if you want to. And these are tube paints. And we have 3 right here. These are more inexpensive versions of tube paints. And I use tube paints probably for 90% of my colors. These are, all 3 brands are very good. These are a little more affordable brands. Master's Touch, you can find at Hobby Lobby. That's their brand of paint. Artist Loft, you can find at Michael's. This is their brand of paint. And Blick Studio, you can find online at blick.com. And this is one of their brands of paints. Blick Studio makes a really nice range of colors. All of these are relatively the same price. They're very competitively priced. So they're about $4 $4.50 or so a tube for a 4-ounce tube, which is not too bad. And you can get several paintings out of one tube of paint, depending on the size, of course. But these are kind of the next step up, I would say, from the craft paints. And I use these a lot. And I normally mix these with a different pouring medium, and I'll talk about that in a second. But after these types of paints, I go and use another two brands, which I use these more often than pretty much all the other colors. These are still tube paints, Liquitex Basics and Amsterdam Standard Series. Very similar. I mean, the paint is very similar. These are a little more high quality. They have a little higher tinting strength, which means there's more pigment in the colors. The Amsterdam is a very almost professional grade. Same with the Liquitex Basics. They use the same pigments in these two brands as they do in their professional grade paints, just a little less of them, but they are still very high quality paints. They're light fast. They have a fantastic color range. They are a little more expensive than these little more student grade paints right down here. But these are fantastic. And I love using both of them. If I had to choose just one though, and people have asked me, if I had to choose one brand and one brand only, what would it be? And I'd probably go with the Amsterdam Standard Series. I love this paint. I love the consistency. I love the color range. They're fantastic paints. But luckily, I don't have to use just one brand. I like to use all of these brands because I have favorite colors in all of them. But these are a little more higher quality. So that's kind of our paints, like our basic paints. So back over here, we've got our intermediate, beginner paints. If you're just getting started, you can kind of graduate up into some of the metallics. Then when you get to beginner intermediate and you want to try some different pouring mediums and get a little more sophisticated, I would recommend getting into these two paints. And then you can kind of incorporate these as you go. These a little more expensive, a little more higher quality tube paints. So those are the paints that I use most often in my paintings. And I'm going to move these aside. I'm going to talk quickly about another type of paint that has gained a lot of popularity, and I'll show you what it is and why I don't really use it. And that is the ready-to-pour paints. These are made by Artist Loft makes them, Deco Art makes them. There's a bunch of other companies and brands that make these ready-to-pour paints, and I don't use them for a couple of reasons. First of all, I find them a little bit overpriced. I think they're pretty expensive for what you get. Second of all, I don't know what's in them. I don't know what they mix into their paints to make them fluid. And I've played with them. I've tried them. I don't love the results I get usually with them. I know other artists have used them extensively and gotten great results. Olga Sobey has made some beautiful paintings with the Artist Loft ready-to-pour paints. The other thing I don't like about them is they have a very limited color range. So you can only buy, maybe 20 different colors max. And you can't get a lot of interesting, subtle colors. You could mix them yourself, if you wanted to. But the other thing I don't like about them is you can't control the consistency all that well. With all of these other paints, from the craft paint up to our Liquitex and Amsterdam, I can control exactly how thick or thin I want them to be. So I know exactly what's in the paints. I can add other ingredients if I wish, and I know how they'll react. With the pre-mixed paints, you really don't know what's in there. You'd have to do a lot of experimenting to try to thicken them up or add other ingredients to them. And for the cost of them, I just don't think it's really worth it. I'd prefer to mix my paints from scratch, know exactly what's in there. But of course, if you want to start acrylic pouring and you want to try it really fast, you can feel free to try them out and use them. You might really like them. They are not for me. These have come out, after I had been pouring for quite a while. So I've been used to mixing my own paints. But if you're brand new and you want to try them, feel free to and go ahead and try them. Don't let me discourage you from trying them. I'm just kind of giving you my thoughts on these types of paints. But so they are not quite for me. They work for some people, but I won't be talking about them at all past this. So I'm going to put these aside, and I'm going to show you some specialty paints that I use for some specific effects. And I'm going to check here and see if we have any questions. Donna has a question, and she's asking, if you use higher grade paint, does that mean you would use less paint because the pigment is greater in the higher grade, if that makes sense? That's a great question, Donna. And you could use a little bit less, and it comes into play in one specific instance, I would say, or two specific instances. As far as these go, like the Liquitex Basics, and let's say the Master's Touch, I use the same amount of paint in all my recipes, all my formulas. I'm not too concerned about that this has less pigment. They're very comparable, I would say. But these have much more pigment than, let's say, our craft paints. But still, I use about the same amount of paint in our formulas. Where this does come into play is if you're using a fluid acrylic, like Golden Fluid. Liquitex makes a fluid acrylic. TriArt makes a fluid acrylic. If you have a fluid acrylic that's very watery, and it's a high tinting strength or high pigmented color, you could use less of that paint if you wanted to get, and it'll still give you a very highly tinted formula. So you could use a lot less of that paint and of those higher grades and the fluidity of them. The only problem with that is if you're going for a thicker formula or for thicker consistency for like ring pours, that paint can be kind of problematic because it is so thin. You'll have to kind of bump up all your pouring mediums to make them thicker. So that's getting kind of a more complex topic. But for those higher grade, like professional grade paints, yes, you could use less of those paints. So that's a long way around of saying, yes, you're right. So great question, though. And let's see here. I'm just going to check quickly and see if there's any other questions I might have missed. And nope, not yet. So let me continue on. So let me show you a couple of specialty paints that I like to use. The first one we've talked about briefly was the DecoArt Americana Decor Metallics. And this is the 24K gold. And this is a beautiful color. And these paints in particular, the 24K gold, and I found the silver creates similar effects, create these big, beautiful cells. And you have to be kind of careful with this paint because it can really take over, the effects can really take over your painting. But it's a fun paint to work with, kind of a specialty paint. You can find this at, I'm sure, Michael's has it usually. It's kind of hard to find sometimes because it's so popular. But Michael's will have it, Hobby Lobby has it, and of course you can find it online. The second type of paint is also by DecoArt, and this is also Americana Decor Satin Enamels. And this is a very special paint because it creates very interesting, unusual effects. So if you've seen anything with the cloud pour technique, pearl pour technique, this is the paint they use. Is satin enamels, creates those interesting cloudy effects for cloud pours and also pearl pours. It's a very fun color to use, and it's also can be hard to find sometimes. But those are very specialized techniques, and we talk about those in our membership. I love the cloud pour, and the pearl pour is a very fun technique also. But these are a little more specialized colors used for kind of specific techniques. And then finally, I'm going to show you another paint I use, which is another version of the satin enamels. And that is it's a house paint actually from Behr. It's a Behr Premium Plus. You can find this at Home Depot. This is their interior satin enamel. and it has very similar effects to the Deco Art satin enamel. So I use this quite often in my cloud mixtures. I also use the satin enamels, but this is a more affordable paint. It has very similar qualities. It's about half the price as this paint, and it can be a little easier to find, the Behr Premium Plus. So these are all examples of kind of more specialized paint that we use for specific effects in certain techniques. And there are many other kind of specialized paints. I'm not going to go over all of them, but these three here are kind of the ones I use most often. So let me move these out of the way. And I'm going to flip the camera back and see if there are any other questions you might have. But then I'm going to talk about some pouring mediums. And I'm going to talk about two, and with a third, maybe. So with all these different paints, these are the acrylic paints we're going to be using in our paint pours, but we have to mix them with something else to get them thinner, because they're usually way too thick right out of the tube or right out of the bottle. We need to get them into more of a pouring consistency. And so we need to mix something with our paints. And this is commonly referred to as a pouring medium. That's kind of a misleading term a little bit, because there are products that are exactly pouring mediums. They are designed to be pouring mediums, and they are named pouring mediums. But there are many other things that you can mix with your paints, which kind of makes them easier to pour. And so I kind of refer to all of these different things as a pouring medium. It's not technically correct, but for our purposes, it's the easiest way to kind of talk about it. So anything we mix with our paint, aside from water, is a pouring medium. So, and I'm going to talk about two main ones that I use most often, and then I'll talk about a third, which I use sometimes, but I really like a lot. There are many, but I'm only going to talk about these three. So the first one is the simplest, probably most affordable pouring medium you can get. And it's Elmer's school glue. And you could also use Elmer's, well, this is school glue too. I thought I grabbed the glue wall. Do I have any of that? Oh my gosh. Nope, I don't. Shoot. Well, I have a big bottle of Elmer's glue all. I grabbed 2 school glues, but Elmer's school glue is probably the most affordable pouring medium to mix with your paints. I use this all the time. I find it works almost just as well as the Elmer's glue wall for a lot less money. And of course, I'm talking about, starting, beginner painters. So, this is perfect for if you're just getting started and want to test out acrylic pouring. You can use this for other kind of more sophisticated paintings too, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it works great, and it's much cheaper than the glue all, the more professional grade of white glue. You can get this anywhere pretty much, and it works just fine. And then tomorrow, I told you before, but I'll say it again. Tomorrow I'm going to share a very easy, almost foolproof recipe, paint mixing recipe, and then I'm going to do a demo for you, and we'll do that tomorrow. But this is number one, and this is a great pouring medium to use if you're getting started. It works wonderful with our small craft paints, and I've used it a lot. And I really like this for a specific reason. I'll talk about that in a second. Number two, the second pouring medium that we're going to be using or talking about is a Floetrol. And this is American Floetrol. Flood Floetrol is the brand name. Technically, it's not a pouring medium, but we are adding it to our paints to make them more fluid. So, I just call it a pouring medium because it thins out the paint. Technically, it's a wood conditioner, or not wood conditioner, but a paint conditioner, which means it just makes paint, I'm talking wall paint, a little more fluid and a little more easier to run through your spray gun. It doesn't leave brush marks or roller marks. So that's why it was designed to thin house paint, but it works wonderfully for our acrylic pouring techniques. And I use a lot of this. This is my number one additive to add to my paints, my number one pouring medium. So, even though it's not technically a pouring medium. And but another thing that the flood Floetrol does, it helps create cells. I don't know exactly why. It's a latex-based product, but it really helps generate cells. So just using Floetrol and paint and a little bit of water, you can create some amazing cells. And that's really all I use most often. Is this is my go-to pouring medium, and I'll share one of my go-to recipes tomorrow. But flood Floetrol, some paint, and a little water, and you can generate tons of cells. So those are the two pouring mediums that I'm going to really talk about today. Those are the ones I recommend starting with. If you're outside the USA, not in America, there's an alternative to flood Floetrol if you can't find this. It's called Owatrol. It's very similar. It's a paint conditioner similar to flood Floetrol by a different brand, but it does very similar things. So you can look up Owatrol. And by the way, I have a recommended supply list for you that, let me show it to you. It's right here. And so you can download this. It's in the Acrylic Pouring Extravaganza page right now, where you got your canvas coverage cheat sheet, along with another resource that I'll share in a second. So those are the two pouring mediums. The third one I'll discuss briefly is an actual pouring medium. It's designed and named pouring medium, and that's by Liquitex. And it's called pouring medium right on the label. It's got the gray label. And this is a acrylic binder. So this is made with the same kind of stuff that's in our acrylic paints. So it will extend the paint, meaning that if you add some of this, we're adding more acrylic binder to our paints, so we can thin them and also create a larger quantity of paint. And these do the same thing, though. Like Elmer's school glue and the Floetrol work as extenders, and that means we're pouring some of these things and combining them with our paints. We're creating a greater volume of paint without using 100% paint. So there's it's like a double benefit. We're thinning our paints, getting a greater quantity of paint, and without having to use so much paint. Because the paint usually is the most expensive ingredient. This stuff is not super cheap, so I don't recommend starting with this. Start with the glue and start with the Floetrol. Those are much more affordable until you kind of get your feet wet with acrylic pouring, get some paintings under your belt. Then you could start experimenting with some more professional grade products like Liquitex. But I use this one a lot. There are many others. I'm sure you might have heard of the GAC 800. That's a very popular product. It's very similar to Liquitex pouring medium. And there are even more than that. So, but I don't want to confuse you with too many products. These are all you really need to be concerned with at the beginning stages: the school glue or Elmer's glue all and Floetrol. All right, so we've talked about some paint. We've talked about some pouring mediums. Now I'm going to talk about something that's kind of controversial now. It's been around since the beginning of paint pouring, and that is silicone. Should we use silicone or should we not use silicone? Well, I'll tell you my thoughts on it, and you can decide for yourself. You can experiment. I always encourage experimentation and trying things out before you make any judgments on them. See how it works for you. But I'm going to show you two different products here, and I'm going to flip the camera again. And maybe before I do that, I'm going to just check for questions, so I'm not leaving anyone behind. And Linda has a great question. Does it have to be white, or can you use the clear glue? And what's the difference? You don't have to use the white. I have used the clear Elmer's school glue many times. It works just the same. And I don't really find that big of a difference. I think the white glue is actually cheaper than the clear glue. The clear glue, if you want to know, was designed to make slime. For kids, slime is a great big deal. You might not know that, but kids use Elmer's school glue and also the clear glue in particular to create slime. I don't know. It's a big thing. It used to be a much bigger thing, but it's a big thing. So the clear glue is very popular for that. But either one works. Now, one thing to note is the white school glue and Floetrol is also white. And also the glue wall is white, of course. But these dry clear. And the clear school glue, is clear from the beginning. But these products also dry clear. So they might look a little milky when you mix them with your paints, but don't let that worry you because they will dry clear. Also, the Liquitex pouring medium, the GAC 800, most pouring mediums in acrylic binders and things have a milky white look to them when they're wet, but they all usually dry clear. So it does alter, it can alter the appearance of your paints when they're wet in liquid slightly. I don't really notice a great big difference between them. But I know that when those dry, they are going to be much more, the glue, the pouring mediums will dry clear and the colors will kind of come back to life a bit. Now, one thing, and this leads to another question, which I get a lot, and it's a big question, is when painting is dry, acrylics always dry a shade darker than when they are wet. And there's nothing we can really do about that. It's just the way the acrylics are formulated. They always kind of drop down just a touch when they are dry. So some people see their paintings and they're beautiful and very vivid and vibrant when they're wet. When they dry, they can look a touch dull. And there's a couple reasons for that. But one of the biggest reasons is because just the acrylics, the way they are made, dry a shade darker. And but I won't go into too much more detail about that right now. I don't want to scare you. So, but that's a great question, Linda. You could use the clear glue as well as the white glue. I've used both of them. And Diane is asking, what is the difference between Liquitex Basic and Liquitex Flow paint? I think you're meaning the Flow acrylic, like the Liquitex Basics, this one right here, the tube paint. This is known as a medium-bodied paint, and same with all of these paints. The Artist Loft, Master's Touch, Amsterdam, all of these tube paints are known as a medium-bodied paint, meaning they're not too liquidy, they're not too runny or fluid, but they're not too stiff. Acrylic paints come in kind of three varieties. There is the kind of standard, which is called a heavy-bodied paint. And those come in like a different type of tube usually, but it's a much thicker paint. And those are mostly professional grade paints. And you can use those very impasto, so meaning like they hold their shape when you can use palette knives and things, and they really create stiff peaks and things like that. That's a heavy body paint. You can use those for acrylic pouring. It's just a lot more difficult to get that paint to a fluid consistency. The medium body paints work so much better because they're kind of halfway there already. We don't have to work so hard to get them into our fluid state. The Liquitex fluid acrylics, same with golden fluid acrylics. Another popular one is Matisse. They're out of Australia. They make a beautiful range of colors and fluid acrylics. They're much more runny than our medium body paints. So it takes a little less, and those are usually professional grade paints. So they're very highly pigmented. It also means they're much higher priced, but you don't have to use as much paint to get your mixtures tinted and to get them incorporated in very highly pigmented mixtures. But on the reverse, they do cost a lot more, and we have to be concerned with our consistencies because the very fluid paints can sometimes be too fluid for a lot of the techniques we're going to be doing. But I hope that answered your question, Diane. That's a great question. And Lily is asking, does glue all work differently than school glue? And I haven't really noticed that much difference. I use them exactly the same. My results are usually exactly the same. One is a little bit more expensive. And I think that has to do with, like, the glue all is a little bit more of it's like a higher grade of glue, but we're not using it as a glue. We're using it as a pouring medium. So I'm not too worried about like adhesion, like trying to glue something together. So you could use either one. I'd experiment with both of them and see what you think. I actually kind of prefer the school glue a little bit more. It's a little bit, and I mean just a little bit more fluid than the glue wall. It's a little stiffer, but they both work very, very similar. And all right. And Lynn is asking, this is a great question. Flow acrylic is not the same as ready pour acrylic. That's absolutely correct. So, we're talking about like fluid acrylics and these ready to pour acrylics. So things like this, like the DecoArt ready to pour, and that's the key word right there, ready to pour acrylics. These are designed for paint pouring. Same with Artist Loft ready to pour paints. These are much, much different than fluid acrylics. Fluid acrylics are pure acrylic paint, only thinner. Only they have a thinner consistency, but they're very highly pigmented. They're pretty expensive, actually. But these ready to pour paints, these use a lower grade of pigments, and I don't even know what they use because they don't have any. They don't tell you what's in here. But ready to pour paints are designed to just pour them right out of the bottle and create some acrylic pour paintings. But the fluid acrylics are professional grade, usually professional grade pure acrylic paints. So yeah, there's a big difference there. You don't want to use your flow acrylic and just pour it right into your onto your canvas. You're going to be very disappointed with your results, and also you're going to waste a ton of money. So that's a great distinction. Yeah, great question, Lynn. And Suzanne also said, ready to pour paints are fairly expensive, and I agree. They are fairly expensive. I think they're overly expensive, and that's why I really don't like them. So, all right. Okay, so let's talk about, we got off track a little bit, but that's okay. Let's talk about silicone. So I'm going to flip the camera here and show you the two brands of silicone I like to use the best. First of all is Spot On, silicone. And now this is called Precision Pouring Oil. It's 100% silicone. You might have seen this in a green label, and it's called Treadmill Belt Silicone. It's the exact same stuff. They just decided to rebrand their silicone for us fluid artists. So they have a precision pouring oil. It's kind of funny, but it's exactly the same as the green Spot On label. I've used this many, many times. It works really well for me. And you only need a couple drops in a couple of your colors, and it can create interesting cells, a very specific type of cell. And I'll talk about that in a second. The other type of silicone or oil that I like to add to my paints is this coconut milk anti-breakage serum. It's from OGX. And this is a hair product. You put it in your hair. You can get this at Walmart or Target or pretty much any grocery store I think I've found it at. Now, the active ingredient in this is not silicone. It is something called dimethicone. It's very similar to silicone, but it's more of a health-based kind of product. So it's used in health and beauty products and other items like that. So it's much more, I guess you could say, I don't want to say safe to use, because both of them are very safe, I would think. But I prefer using the dimethicone a little bit more now. I find it is less aggressive a little bit than the precision pouring oil or the Spot On silicone. You could try either one. They both work very similar. I use them the same. I put a couple drops in a few of my colors when I want a specific type of cell. And I only really use the silicone anymore when I'm using my glue base medium. And there's something about the glue and the silicone or dimethicone that creates a very beautiful looking cell. Um, and you have to use heat to kind of bring the cells to life. And I'll show you what I used to kind of heat the silicone and the glue. But this is pretty much the only time now I use the silicone, is for in conjunction with my Elmer's school glue or glue wall pouring medium, and for specific techniques. And but now I'm going to have to go back on that and tell you there's another reason I like to use silicone for another technique, but I'll talk about that in a second. So, but silicone is kind of a controversial now. Before, everyone was using it. You know, a few years ago, that was like the way to get cells, is you just use silicone. But I don't really like the way silicone and Floetrol work together. I don't like the cells created with silicone when I put it in the Floetrol. And I really like the way the cells look with Floetrol just by itself. So whenever I use Floetrol, I never use silicone. I only use it for certain ingredients or certain specific techniques. So, but with Floetrol, you really don't need it. And the big problem with silicone, let me flip back here. The big problem with silicone is it stays on your painting. It doesn't evaporate like our water does or like other pouring medium ingredients. And when it dries, it leaves an oily, kind of slick surface on your painting. And that's not that big of a deal unless you want to apply a top coat, like a varnish, or especially like a resin. That's very popular, to put resin on top of your painting. Well, silicone, if you have that silicone residue on there, it can really screw it up. And it makes working with resin incredibly difficult, because the silicone will reject the resin. And so you'll be left with these big pock marks. So people are faced with having to clean off the silicone from their dried paintings. And there's a whole big process to that. There are many different ways to do it. And, you know, people complain about that. So silicone is a love it or hate it type of a thing. Some people love using it. Some people hate it. And, you know, it all depends on what you're doing, though, of course. Like if you really love resin and you want to resin your paintings, I probably wouldn't recommend using a lot of silicone or any silicone at all. Go with something else. It'll make that whole resining process a whole lot easier. But if you love the look of the silicone cells, I recommend maybe staying away from resin. So there's this big balancing act. I don't hate silicone. I like to use it for certain things, and it works just fine for me. And I found, and this is my experience, that using the dimethicone, the coconut milk hair serum, it's a whole lot easier to remove than the 100% silicone, the spot-on stuff. So if you want to try it out and use it, I recommend picking up some of the coconut milk, trying that and seeing what you think. The two act so similarly. I don't think your cells are going to look that much different, but the coconut milk might be a whole lot easier for you to clean off when it comes time to apply a top coat to your paintings. So with that said, that is like kind of a, you know, there's more to be said about silicone. I also use it in certain swipes. And swiping is a very particular technique where you're dragging something across a field of paint and it brings up a bunch of cells. And I use silicone for swipes, and I have no problem with it at all. So it all depends on the techniques you want to experiment with or are most attracted to and want to try. But I say if you're interested in trying silicone, give it a shot. If not, then leave it be and just go with Floetrol. The other thing about silicone is it's not a magic ingredient. You can't just add a couple drops of silicone and you're going to get like amazing cells. You have to have the right consistency. You have to have the right paint formulas. It's just another ingredient like any other ingredient. Everything else has to be correct as well to kind of reap the benefits of silicone. So, but the medium, and I'll talk about this more tomorrow. I'm going to show you a painting using glue and the craft paints, and I'll add some silicone to it as well. So you can kind of see this whole process and how I like to heat the silicone. I use a little torch like this. It's just a kitchen torch. I got this on Amazon. It's a very specific model. It's very inexpensive. It's got a trigger right here, so you pull it like you're pulling like a gun, but it works great. I love this simple little torch. It's about 15 bucks, but this one works great for me. I have a more sophisticated one, like a more professional one, and I still prefer this. I use this way more often. So, but that's how we heat the silicone and bloom those cells to life. So we've talked about a bunch of stuff already. Hopefully I haven't overwhelmed you. And Toujours is asking a distinction, coconut oil, not coconut milk. And let me take a look at this again. I'll show you just so you can see. This is nourishing coconut milk anti-breakage serum. So it's probably very similar to the coconut oil, but this is a hair care product. And so I have a supply list and it has this exact product on it. So you can go look it up also. And let me take it back. So I hope that helps. That's what this stuff is a coconut milk anti-breakage serum for your hair by OGX. Let me go back here quickly. Where's my mouse? Okay, sorry about that. I lost my mouse. Okay, but that's a great question. Yeah, there's a bunch of different coconut things out there. You want to make sure you get the right one. But I do have a Amazon storefront that has all the products that I use, and I put them on there so you can see what they are. If you want to purchase them, that's great. I do get a tiny commission, but it's mostly just for convenience for me also, because I have all this stuff listed there. I know exactly where to go to get it. But if you wanted to take a look at exactly what I like to use, it's a really great resource. So it's on the PDF that you can download, and that'll take you right over to the Amazon storefront. I'll also share it in the chat too, so you could go check it out. I have all of these products listed in there, or maybe not every single one, but almost all of them. So if you're confused about anything I'm talking about, go there and you can check it out and see what I use. And I'm looking at, see any other questions? Let's see, Joy has a question. I know that using certain paints together creates cells. What paints can you use together that don't create cells? Well, that's a very interesting question. And it's a little tricky to answer because cells happen mostly because of the different densities or different weights of the pigments in the paints. So if you do not want to get any cells at all, I recommend do not use metallic paints. So stay away from any metallics. Just go with straight colors. This is a blue-gray, orange, yellow. There are many different colors, but stay away from all the metallic colors. Definitely stay away from deco art stuff. Stay away from the satin enamels. And then don't use Flood Floetrol. So if you want to avoid cells as much as possible, and you can only pretty much minimize them, I don't think there's any proven way to completely avoid them. You want to use a different type of pouring medium. Just using Elmer's glue all is a good way to minimize cells. The glue by itself doesn't promote lots of cells unless you use the silicone. That doesn't mean you can totally avoid them. I've gotten cells with just the glue and regular paints, but it's a good way to minimize them. So I would avoid Floetrol. I would use a different type of a pouring medium. One that I like to use, and now we're getting into other products and stuff, so I don't want to confuse you, but I'll show you this. One thing I like to use is the Deco Art pouring medium. And this is relatively inexpensive pouring medium. It's more expensive than the Floetrol or the glue, but if you mix this with your paints, you're less likely to get cells. It's a great pouring medium, and you'll get some beautiful paintings, but they will be less likely to get some cells. So I hope that helps, Joy. There's no like guaranteed 100% way to avoid them, but you can minimize them for sure. So hope that helps. And Linda is asking, here's the question, the dreaded question, what is the best way of cleaning off silicone from your paintings? I'll give you a quick answer. And there's no best way. There's many, many ways. What I do, this is what I do, and it works pretty good. Of course, I don't use resin ever to go over silicone. So just keep that in mind. I just take it, and once it's dry, like 4 weeks, you know, it's got to be totally dry, totally cured, because they're going to be scrubbing around on it. You put it under the sink or in your bathtub, depending on the size, and then spray it all down with water. Get some Dawn dish soap, scrub it down, you know, gently, of course, with a sponge, and then rinse it off like very, very well. And then let that dry, maybe do it again. And that's probably the best way I found. Now you could, before you go rinsing it with the Dawn, you could give it a wipe down with some baby wipes or hand wipes, things like that. That's a good thing to do. It'll get like a majority of the silicone off, and then you can kind of clean up the rest with Dawn dish soap. But it's just like scrubbing a pan out. You got to do it a couple times perhaps to get that silicone off. It's not a very fun thing to do, but it works pretty well. Now, there are many other ways of cleaning silicone. There's things with cornstarch and a whole bunch of stuff. I don't really get into that, but hopefully that gives you a good idea. But again, I don't put resin on any painting that has silicone in it. So just a word of warning about that. All right. Let's see here. And Suzanne also says, Artist Loft and DecoArt pouring mediums about the same price. Yeah, that's true. They're both, I don't have a Artist Loft handy, but Artist Loft, DecoArt, they're relatively about the same price. They're both cheaper than like Liquitex pouring medium or the Golden GAC 100 or 800. So, all right. So let's see here. So next up, let's talk about some other supplies that you might need for painting. We went and talked about paints for a long time. Oh my gosh, almost an hour. Geez. So I'm going to kind of speed it up a little bit. But let's talk about the other things you need for acrylic pouring. And then the very next most important thing you need is something to pour on, right? And so I recommend a couple different things. Number one would probably be a stretched canvas. This is just a Blick stretched canvas, a Premier 9x12. These work great. You can get the bargain or what are they called? The bargain packs of canvas. I use those all the time from Michaels, from Hobby Lobby. Those also work great. This is a little more expensive one. But any of those, I'd probably recommend if you're just starting out, get the value packs for sure and start on those. And no need to spend money on more expensive canvases. Get the cheapest ones you can. I think the Michaels value packs and Hobby Lobby value packs are a great deal. I recommend getting those. Another thing you can use is, grab it here. Now these are a little more expensive. I like them a lot. Are hard panels. This is a piece of masonite, and it's cradled, meaning there's a frame around it, like a wooden frame. You can get regular masonite too if you wanted to. These are primed and ready to paint on. I love pouring on panels, the smooth panels. It's ideal for acrylic pouring. The canvases have the canvas texture that when the paint dries, you can kind of see that canvas texture. It's not that big of a deal. I have done that on hundreds and hundreds of paintings. I don't love the canvas texture though. So I like to paint on panels. You get this very smooth surface when the paint dries. But these are maybe another step up because these are a little more expensive. quite a bit more expensive than like the value canvas packs, but they're very fun to pour on. Now you might be tempted to pour on some of these things. These are canvas panels, and they look ideal. They're like perfect. They're flat and they're hard, they're rigid. But the problem with canvas panels is that we're dumping so much water and paint on them that when they dry, they will start to curl up like a potato chip. And there's just so much moisture being absorbed into the backing. I've tried many different ways of trying to keep that from happening. None of them have worked. They're okay to work with if you work on small ones. I'd say an 8x10, you're going to get a warped painting, like a little 8x8 or 6x5, something like that. You can pour on those small, little, tiny canvas panels without too many problems. Any larger, they're going to start to just completely warp and buckle on you. So, word of warning, you can use them for practice. They're great for that because they're very inexpensive. They're readily available. If you just want to practice and try a couple paintings, go ahead and use the canvas panels. But just be warned that they will buckle up on you. You can kind of bend them back into shape, but as a long-term solution, I don't recommend them. So they're great for practice. For more paintings you want to keep or sell eventually, you'll need a better solution than the canvas panels. And I do have another way of pouring. It's a very inexpensive way. I'll share that with you perhaps later this week. It's called my inexpensive paint pouring hack. And it works awesome. And especially if you're a beginner, you can do tons and tons of paintings for very, very, very cheap. And that works great. So, but I'll share that with you down the road a little bit. So let's see here. Next up, let's talk about some other supplies, other things you might need, and especially related to canvases. I like to prep my canvases to get them elevated up off the pouring surface. It makes everything easier to grab them, easier to tilt them. And then when the paint's flooding over the sides, you have little stands or something to keep them elevated while they're drying. There's a couple things you could use for prepping your canvases. And I got a couple questions maybe. Lily is asking, do you have to put gesso and sealant on the canvas panels? I wouldn't do any prep work for the canvas panels. Just go ahead and pour on them if you want to, but they will buckle on you. I've tried gessoing them. I've tried sealing them so they wouldn't absorb all the water. Nothing really works. So I wouldn't spend any time prepping them. But if you want to use them for practice, yeah, just go ahead and pour right on them, Lily. Great question. All right. So let's see here. I'm going to flip over to the other screen. I'll show you a couple other little tools here. So this right here is a container of giant push pins. You might have seen these on some of the other acrylic pouring videos. These are just giant push pins, and they work great for putting in the back of your canvases. I like them. I use them quite a bit. They work well because they're a nice big handle to kind of grab while you're tilting your canvases around. You can find these on Amazon. They're on my Amazon page. What I use most often, though, are these things. These are called cup hooks, and I get these at Home Depot or Lowe's. This is a 1-inch version. I have some larger ones. I have a 2-inch version, a 1.5-inch. And these are little hooks, little metal hooks. Let me show you one here. And I've used these very often. It's just a little hook like this. And the nice thing is it has a little threaded end here. If you can see that, there's like threads. So you can thread it right into the back of your canvas. And the great thing about that is you can adjust the length of how far the cup hook is in your canvas, which means you can level your canvas with just these cup hooks. And I'll show you an example. So here's a painting. This is a demo I did, I think, a while back. And I just left the cup hooks in them. So right here are the cup hooks. And I put tape on the back of my canvases. And this is just regular masking tape. I like the regular old masking tape the best, but you can see where the cup hooks are. And I twist them in maybe about halfway or so. And then you can adjust them. You can tilt them in, or you can turn them in farther, or you can turn them out, and it'll adjust your canvas so it's nice and level on your tabletop. And in order to put these in, I use like a little awl. I've got this is like a, just a wood awl that I got from Amazon. It's got a really sharp point on it. So I just put my canvas upside down, and I'll just take my awl and just make a little hole, just push the awl in, and it makes the cup hook really easy to thread into your wood. You just need a little starter hole there, and these twist in very, very easily because your stretcher bars are basically just they're pine. They're made out of pine, which is a pretty soft wood. So that's how I install my little cup hooks into the back of my canvases. And that's what I do most often. And of course, I prep the back with tape, and I'll show you what the canvas looks like underneath that tape. And I like the masking tape by itself. There are fancy tapes, like there's painter's tape. There's the really fancy, what's it called, frog tape. Those are all much more expensive. I just like this stuff. This is like a 1 1/4, 1.5 inch masking tape. It's the cheapest stuff you can get, but it works just great for me. So I'll peel this back. And this is just one of the kind of value pack canvases. And I'll just peel off some of the tape, and you can kind of see what it looks like. Now, I do have a little bleed under here. Like, you can see that. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't mind that one little bit. If that bothers you, you can get a more expensive tape, like the frog tape, and you'll get a cleaner line. But see, most of this, this is pretty clean to me. This doesn't bother me at all. I don't mind that little bleed under. It just makes it look like a real painting, in my opinion. So, but if you want a super sharp line, then I would recommend getting like the frog tape. That works a little bit better and gives you a much sharper paint line. But I always usually tape off the back of my canvases. It gives you just a nice clean look. And when you are done with your painting. So that is kind of how I prep my canvases. So I use the push pins work good. The cup hooks work great. Just some masking tape is all you really need, and my little awl. And that's all I really do for prepping my canvases. Now let's take a look at some other things. And let's see here. So I'm just checking to see if there are any other questions at the moment. And let's see. Diane's got a question. Oops, that's not Diane. That's Susan. Hey, Susan. She likes the 1 1/4 cup hooks the best. Oh, let me show you those. So, do I have the 1 1/4? Here are 1.5 inch. I'll just show you the different sizes. These are great big ones. I use these for large paintings when I want a little extra room and a little extra something to hold on to. These inch and a half ones work really well for me. But I have 1 1/4 right here. These are 1 1/4. And these actually have a little rubber coating on them, which makes them a little easier to grab. They're not quite as sharp. So these are 1 1/4. They work really, really, really well. So any of these sizes work great. But I love the cup hooks. They're very, very versatile. They're inexpensive. They're easy to install. And you can really, kind of fine tune your canvases. So they work really well. Okay, so let's... And then Linda has got a question. Brad, do you fill in the cup holder holes before selling your paintings, and what would you use? You could. Let me flip back here. You could fill them in if you want to. I really don't. I find that part of the process. These paintings that we're doing, they take a lot of prep work. There's a process involved, and all of these little things are part of the process. Taping off the back of your painting, adding the cup hooks in. It's all kind of like part of the story of your painting. And so I just like to leave them alone. And if the customer looks and, oh, what's that? They're not going to be bothered by it because it's the back of their painting. So I don't think they're going to really care. They shouldn't anyway. But I just like to leave them there. But if you wanted to fill them in, you could use a wood putty. And the best one to get is called Famo wood. You can find it. It's called FAMOWOOD, just all one word, Famo wood. I think you could find it at Lowe's or Home Depot, or maybe like Sherwin-Williams will have it. You might have to go to like a little more specialty store, like a lumber store or woodworking store. Like if you go to Rockler Woodworking, they might have it. But pretty much any kind of like a wood filler, and you just put some wood filler in the holes, let it dry, give it a little sand, and it'll look just like the wood. And the wood fillers come in a wide range of different colors. So you can just get a pine color, and because all these are made out of pine, just use some pine wood filler, stick it in there, let it dry. They dry really, really relatively quickly, like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Give it a little sand and you're ready to go. So, but hopefully that helps, Linda. Good question. All right. And let's see. And Lily is asking, she had a correction. I did not mean panels. I'm asking about the cradle panels. About gessoing the cradle panels. And absolutely, yes, if you have any kind of a wood panel that you want to work with. Now, this panel right here is a pre-primed gessoed panel. This one you wouldn't have to prime. It's ready to go. But if it's a raw wood panel, or raw masonite like this, you must prime it. And there's a series of steps that you have to go through to prime these panels. And I've talked about that before. I've talked about that in the membership. I'm not going to go over that process right here because I know it's going to be confusing. But I do talk about that extensively inside our membership. But yes, anytime you want to pour on any kind of wood, it must be primed the proper way. At least I believe so. I know a lot of paint pourers just start pouring on wood, or they start pouring on MDF panels without any kind of priming. I would never do that. It's going to come back to bite you down the road. So, because you don't want to pour on raw wood panels. So, but that's a great clarification, Lily. So, all right. Let's see. Cool. All right. So no other questions at the moment. Let's talk about a couple other materials here. So we're at about the hour mark. Time's flying by. So we talked about paints. We talked about some pouring mediums. Hopefully I haven't totally lost you. We talked about some canvases and other things to pour on. Let's talk about some how to mix up our paints a little bit. What are we going to mix these in? And I like to use very simple cups for mixing my paint. My favorite cup of all is this little cup. It's a 5.5 ounce snack cup, also known as a souffle cup. You can find them at restaurant supply stores. You can also find them at the grocery store now. Walmart sells these. They're available all over the place. They come with these little lids, which are perfect because the little lids can keep your paint fresh for quite some time if you have any leftover. But this is the cup I use most often to mix up my paints. And I have a ton of paints over here to your left that are all leftover paints. I'll just grab a couple. So here's one, here's one. There are so many. I've got tons and tons and tons of them. And so these are all leftover paints. They've all got the lids on. This paint will stay fresh for quite a long time. I can use it again down the road. I can combine colors together. These cups are fantastic. So I use them by far more than any other cup. And you can reuse them, which is nice. They have a little 5. There's that little triangle on the back. And let me see if I can show you. Probably not, but I'll show you. I'll try to show you. So there's a little triangle. I'll draw it. So we've probably all seen these little triangles, kind of like this. They got these little arrows. And that's like it's like the recycling, triangle, right? For the plastic. Well, this particular plastic cup has a number 5 in it, and that means it's polypropylene. There's also a PP next to the cup, next to our little triangle, and that's polypropylene. And the great thing about polypropylene is that acrylic paint doesn't stick to it. So when the paint dries, or if it dries on there, you can just go in and peel the paint right out, and it won't stick to a polypropylene cup. It's awesome. So you can use these cups again and again. Now, the lids are not polypropylene. The lids are a number 1, which is a PET. So the paint does not come off with the lids. But where do I have one? But I don't worry about that. Here's a lid. I've used this lid to cover probably 10 different colors. And I just use them over and over and over again until they get all gunked up and then, stop adhering to the top of the cup. So don't worry about the lids. You can reuse those again and again. But the cups, you do need to clean them out if you want to reuse them for mixing paint. So you can pull out the bulk of the dry paint. You could have a soapy bucket underneath your table and just dump them in there. And the soapy water will kind of loosen the paint up, and you can just kind of wipe them out with a sponge. They work really, really well. So these are great, great cups for mixing. And let's see here. And then these cups, I use these for larger batches of paint, also for layering my cup, for pouring paint out. And these are not the number 5 polypropylene cups. So the paint does not like to peel off of these. So these are kind of a one-time use, but they still work really, really well. And then they don't have lids usually. Some of them you can buy with lids, like drink cup lids with straws and things. But there's another thing I'd like to use to cover, and it will cover any type of a cup and keep the paint fresh. And that is Press and Seal Glad Cling Wrap. I love this stuff. I just started using it not too long ago, but I'll pull some out here. It's kind of got a sticky backing. You might have seen this. You might have it in your kitchen, actually. I'm going to just cut a little part of it. I'm just going to cut a little square out and then move this aside. But this press and seal stuff is awesome. So if you have a cup like this, and you have to put the right side on it, but you can kind of feel it's a little tacky. And then you just work just rub it down on the lid, then that's going to stay on there. And it's on there very stiffly. And I've had paint cups tip over with it on there, and the paint stays in the cup. So these are great for keeping your paint fresh in any type of a larger cup that doesn't have a lid. You could be using glass cups, other plastic type of cups. As long as it's got a flat lid, the press and seal works awesome. So, and let's see here. So these kind of cups I use for mixing up larger quantities of paints, layering my colors to pour for ring pours, flip cups, things like that. And Linda's got a question, and she's asking, will you be speaking about measurements in regards to paint and pouring mediums? And do we need a scale? I have great difficulties in measuring to get the right consistencies. That is a great question, Linda. I will be talking about a very easy paint mixing formula tomorrow, maybe 2 of them. And I'll be talking much more about consistencies later in the week. I believe Thursday, I'm going to talk about consistency specifically. So join us for that. video, that live video. It's going to be at the same exact time, but because there's only so much I can talk about in one live, so I'm just focusing mostly on the materials in this one. But we will be talking about some simple paint mixing formulas tomorrow, and consistencies in particular later in the week. Great question, though. And oh, by the way, do you need a scale? A scale can help. I have one, but I have it for a very specific reason. You do not need one, but it can be helpful to have a scale. So that's really up to you. And I talk about that in great detail in our membership, and a course that I have just recently finished, which I'll tell you about later in the week. And it's going to be very exciting, because you'll have what am I trying to say here? My gosh, I'm overexcited. You'll have the chance to get that course for free. So if you stick with me. So, let's see here. So yeah, but those are great questions, and I will be talking about those in more detail. And let's see here. And then Chris is asking, are these recorded so we can watch them if we can't make them? Yes, absolutely, Chris. And by the way, let me flip back here to me. Hello again. These are recorded, and you can catch the replays. I will share them with you if you have joined my Acrylic Pouring Extravaganza page to get the canvas coverage cheat sheet download. And I'm adding all these other downloads and resources in with that first canvas coverage cheat sheet. So I'm going to share the link with you if you haven't done that yet. It doesn't cost anything. I'm going to put it in the chat. So if you go here and you haven't signed up for that, well, I would recommend signing up for that. You can get a bunch of cool, awesome resources for free that'll be in there. And I will share the replay links with you, so you can keep them and watch them at your convenience. If you miss days, you can come back and check on them, and or watch them whenever you want. So you'll have a list of all those replays, and you can watch them at any time. They will be on YouTube. So, all right. So great question, Chris. All right. So the final thing, I think there's one more thing I want to talk about. And it's another product that I use, and this is more studio-based. So it's for your pouring setup, for your pouring studio. You need some kind of a table to pour on, obviously. You could pour on the floor, I guess, if you wanted to, but a table is very convenient. I'd recommend getting maybe a drop cloth to put on that table. Maybe get a drop cloth to put under your table, because this can be a kind of a messy type of art. But over your drop cloth, I recommend putting freezer paper. This is Reynolds freezer paper. It's probably my favorite thing in the world. And it's a weird thing to be so excited about, but I love this freezer paper. You can buy it at Walmart. You can buy it at any grocery store, really, Target. It's really wide. This is 18 inches wide, which is quite wide for like a paper like this. And it's pretty affordable. It's not very expensive. This whole roll was about $7, and it lasts quite a while. And it's a relatively thick paper. Oops, I'm making a mess. But one side is shiny. This is a shiny side. One side is more of a papery side. And it works. It is the best thing to pour on as far as like a pouring surface for your table. So sorry about all the noise and ruckus. So what I like to do is I pull that out. I tape it down to my tabletop, and you can tape two together. The tape sticks to it, which is great. If you've been using like parchment paper, tape does not stick to parchment paper at all. It's terrible, but tape sticks to freezer paper great on both sides. And it works like a charm. If you were thinking about getting a great big silicone mat, I'd say go get the freezer paper instead. When paint dries on it, it peels right off. The paint does not soak through the freezer paper. It doesn't get it wrinkly. You can pour a ton of paint on it. It'll stay nice and flat. You can scrape up your paint drippings, put them in a cup to keep the paint fresh. You could let the paint dry on your freezer paper and peel off paint skins. It works amazingly well, and it's very easy to find. It's very affordable. I really, really love it. I go through a lot of it because I'm doing lots and lots of paintings. You notice I don't have it down right now, though. I've got like a gray paper down, and the only reason for that is just because of my camera setup. Because the white paper is so bright to the cameras, I don't want to blind you. So the gray paper makes it a whole lot easier to kind of see my work surface. So that's why I use this gray paper. But for you, I recommend getting the freezer paper. When I'm just painting for myself and mixing paints and stuff, I always have the freezer paper down. It's awesome. So that is probably my biggest studio tip for you, is pick up some Reynolds freezer paper. And I don't think you'll be sorry. It works so well. And you can even reuse it if you want. Let the paint dry, peel it off, roll up your freezer paper. You can roll it out again and just use it again and again and again. I've used the same freezer paper, I don't know, for weeks on end and for dozens of paintings. So it works awesome. So I think with that, we've kind of gone pretty long here. Oh, Diane's got a question. And Diane is asking, can you get a cheap shower curtain? Absolutely. A cheap shower curtain also works. I would recommend getting a shower curtain, putting that down on your table as like a drop cloth, and then put the freezer paper on top. I like the freezer paper because it's very easy to lay out and peel back up, roll it up. You can throw it away easily. You can recycle it. It's just so convenient. The shower curtain is great, but you're kind of stuck with it until the paint is dry, unless you want to scrub off all the paint. The freezer paper you can easily replace or go to a new sheet, let the old one dry, come back to the old one. So I just like the freezer paper so much more. It's just, to me, much more convenient. Both work great though. So, and what side of the freezer paper? You want the shiny side up. So you definitely want to paint on the shiny side. If you put the shiny side down, the paper, and paint on the papery side, it's going to all buckle up and be like regular paper. So shiny side up is what you want to work on. So good question though. And Warren says like the 10 by 12 plastic drop cloths. Yeah, those work great too. It all depends on how you want your setup to be. For me, the freezer paper is the thing. I just love it. So, all right. So finally, let me share one more thing with you. Here is the link to my Amazon storefront. If you want to check it out, you can see all of the different things that I use in my pouring. I'm putting it in the chat. And I don't put anything on there that I don't personally use. I might not use it every single day, but I do use it. So everything on there is something I recommend and actually use myself. So you can check it out if you would like to. There is the link in there. And also, if you go to that other link, the previous link at acrylicpouringacademy.com/live, and go to that Canvas Coverage Cheat Sheet 2.0 and pick that up, well, where you find that, you'll also find a recommended color list. And these are colors that I use very frequently. Not every color I use, but ones I use quite often. And I've broken this list up into 3 categories. I have very light colors. I've got kind of mid-value, kind of in the middle range colors, and then very dark colors. I think it's important to have a kind of a color palette that has very light colors, very dark colors, and kind of mid-range, mid-value colors. So this is waiting for you there if you want to go check that out. And then all of these colors I love and I use them all the time. You don't have to use all these colors or get them all. It's just ones that I love using. Feel free to pick and choose the ones you like or don't like. That's totally up to you. And then finally, you'll be able to find in the same spot this paint pouring supply list. And this has lots of the things we talked about today and a couple more. So it's got the paint brands I like. It's got the pouring mediums right here that I recommended, we're talking about surfaces, all the little gadgets and tools and other things that we talked about today. So those are both available to you. Also, the link to my Amazon page is on the bottom of that supply list if you want to go check it out. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you learned something new or are excited about jumping into paint pouring, giving it a try. If you're brand new to it, this might have been kind of a refresher for a lot of you because are more experienced and you've been pouring for a while. Well, I'm going to be sharing some much more advanced things as we progress through this week. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about a very simple, almost foolproof paint mixing formula, and I'll be doing a demo using that formula. And that'll be in the downloads too. Tomorrow, you can check that out. And then Wednesday, we'll be talking about some color theory things that I think you'll be finding interesting. And we'll be getting a little more advanced as we move along here. So thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Same time, we're going to be going live at 3 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, 6 o'clock Eastern time. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Have a great evening, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.